And the heaven and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. The Hebrew reads, Vaychulu hashamim v'haaretz, vaychol tzva'am, vaychol Elohim bayom hashvi'i milakto asher asa, vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol milakto asher asa. Let me read verse 3 also. And God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because that in it he rested from all his work, which God in creating had made. And the Hebrew reads, Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i, vayikadesh oto, ki bo shavat mikol milakto asher bara Elohim la'asot. And let me read another passage out of the Torah. Let's jump over this time to the book of Exodus. Give me a moment here, I'm pulling this up electronically. Let's go to Exodus chapter 31, and we'll scroll all the way down to verse 16. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, for a perpetual covenant. And verse 17, It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased from work and rested. The Hebrew reads, V'shamru v'nei Yisrael at Shabbat la'asot, et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam brit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, othi le'olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, uv'yom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash. That's Exodus 31 verses 16 and 17. Question, doesn't Romans 14 teach that Sabbath keeping is optional? Answer, space does not permit me to develop the complete context of this familiar passage, but suffice to say, Paul could not have been suggesting that Sabbath keeping is optional because the Torah did not present Sabbath keeping as optional for Israel. Read Exodus 31:16. That's why I chose that portion in our liturgy this evening, right? On the contrary, Sabbath is the very sign of the Mosaic covenant. It's like the very wedding ring. It is the very wedding ring between God and his bride Israel. The passage is most likely, the passage here in Romans 14, is most likely comparing fast days with non-fast days. And the fact that those who fast consider that day as special, whereas those who are not fasting on that day do not consider that fast day special. That's likely the context of Romans 14, especially when we get to verse 5, where it talks about one man considers one day, another considers another day, let each man be convinced in his own mind. I'm paraphrasing the verse there. Let's continue reading my answer. Moreover, the larger context of Romans 14 even goes on to teach that God accepts each person's devotional behavior, since it is done in service to the very same God as each man's counterpart. This means that even if Paul were referring to Sabbath, at the very least, no one can judge one's brother based on keeping or not keeping. There's so much more to this passage, but I will leave off here for now. Okay, that's the commentary. Let me kind of flesh it out a little bit if it isn't self-explanatory. Essentially, in standard Christian thought, in Christian circles, we have Romans 14 being presented to, say, Messianics who are keeping Torah, keeping Sabbath to the best of their ability. We have your average Christian pastor presenting this passage in Romans 14. Specifically, let me pull up. Verse 5 is the verse that really is presented as an effort to challenge Sabbath keeping. Verse 5 says, one person considers some days more holy than others, while someone else regards them as being alike. What is important is for each to be fully convinced in his own mind. So as we go back to my Galatians commentary here, question 7, essentially, I hear many pastors challenging me as a Torah keeper, as a Messianic Jew, saying, Ariel, that's fine for you to keep Sabbath. That's fine for you to recognize seventh-day Sabbath keeping. But what Paul told me in Romans 14:5 is that you can consider me, Ariel, you can consider you can consider Sabbath keeping as special for you, but I don't have to necessarily consider it special for me. Instead, what Paul is giving me is the freedom to choose either Sabbath keeping or Sunday keeping. And I have chosen to keep Sunday keeping instead of Sabbath keeping. In fact, I don't think that one day is really special at all. I think all days are special. I simply choose to worship on Sunday, because that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So that's kind of how the general discussion goes. On the one hand, it is true that using Romans 14, that Paul is teaching the equality of one day versus another day, but the question is that day the Sabbath? And that's really the issue. If we can identify what day he's referring to in the passage, then we'll have a better understanding of the passage. And so what I said is that context is king. Context determines the meaning of any given passage. And if you read the chapter as a whole, you're going to find that the chapter centers on these differences between these two groups of individuals. We have the group called the weak and the group called the strong. And without getting into a heated discussion of who the strong and the weak are, suffice to say, because my view of who the weak and the strong are is different from the traditional Christian view, but suffice to say, Paul is saying that their views are both acceptable before God. And in the context of these views, that neither one is right or wrong in this discussion in Romans 14, what I'm trying to say is that the view that teaches that Romans 14:5 is referring to the Sabbath day is probably unlikely, because that would make the day of Sabbath as an optional commandment rather than the way that the Torah describes Sabbath keeping. It's not optionally given to Israel. It doesn't take a seminarian to read through the Torah, the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and discover that the Sabbath is of importance. It is a set-apart day. It's special. That's why I read the Genesis passage as well as the Exodus passage. It is a day that God sanctified. It is a day that God set apart. It is not a man-made, designated holy day. It is a God-declared holy day. And therefore, it's wrong to assume that Paul would come along and rob God of that authority. Only God has the authority to declare the Sabbath day holy or not. Only God has the authority to relax the Sabbath day, if possible, if that were even happening, which I don't believe it is. So to make Romans speaking of the Sabbath is to do damage not only to the context of the bulk of the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, but it's also to do damage to the context of Paul's writings here in Romans chapter 14, because it doesn't fit the context that he would be speaking of the Sabbath day. The imperatives of the Bible are not optional. You know, the commandment in the New Testament that says, "Do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit," right? That's in Ephesians. To be filled with the Spirit is not optional for a Christian. It's a commandment. You know, husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. Those aren't optional. Those are commandments. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Those aren't optional. Those are commandments. Those are imperatives, right? I think every Christian would agree. And so the Bible is full of imperatives. It's full of commandments. It's not full of options. God doesn't give us options. It doesn't say, gee, I hope you guys are convinced that these are good things to do, therefore please implement them. So that's all I really want to say about question number 7. I think you guys are getting my point. Let's move on to question number 8.